I am Walter Higgins, 66 years old, and I built a chain of hardware stores across 3 counties from a single rented storefront in Tulsa. After the stroke left my left side too weak to stand, my daughter and her husband stood at the foot of my hospital bed, checking a text message instead of my pulse. They told me the cruise ship left port in 11 hours and there was nothing anyone could do about that. I just closed my eyes and let them believe I'd accepted it. By the time they landed in Cozumel, I had already signed the paperwork that would end their access to everything I had ever given them. The first thing I remember after the stroke was the smell. Antiseptic, and something floral underneath it, like someone had tried to cover a hospital with a candle and failed. My right hand worked fine. My left hand lay on the blanket like it belonged to somebody else. I'd spent 41 years running Higgins Home and Hardware, building it from one leaky-roofed shop on Cherry Street into 18 locations stretched across Tulsa, Broken Arrow, and out toward Sand Springs. I knew what it meant to lose control of something you'd built with your own hands. I never thought it would be my own body. The doctor said it was a moderate ischemic stroke. Lucky, she called it, all things considered. My speech was intact. My cognition was intact. But the left side of my body had gone quiet, and she said recovery would take months of therapy, maybe longer, and that I would need someone with me around the clock for at least the first several weeks. I asked her to call my daughter. Melissa arrived 4 hours later. Her husband, Grant, walked in a step behind her, already looking at his watch like it owed him money. Melissa was 34, my only child, the one I had put through college debt-free, the one whose wedding I had paid for down to the last centerpiece, the one who called me Dad, in a voice that used to mean something before it started meaning, "Can you send money?" She didn't hug me. She stood by the window with her arms folded, and Grant stood beside her, scrolling his phone, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. "Dad," she finally said, "this is terrible timing." I waited for the rest of the sentence, the part where she explained what she meant, hoping I'd misheard her through the fog of the pain medication. She kept going instead. "We fly out tonight. The Caribbean cruise, remember? I told you about it in March. Non-refundable. All 4 cabins. Grant's parents are already at the Port Hotel in Galveston waiting for us." I looked at my own daughter and I asked her, plainly, whether she understood that her father had just had a stroke. Grant answered for her. "The doctor said you're stable, Walter. That's good news. We're not abandoning you. There's nothing we can physically do standing in this room. You'll have nurses. That's literally their job." I had been transferring $4,000 a month into their joint account for going on 5 years, ever since Grant's consulting firm had supposedly needed seed capital to get off the ground. I had co-signed the loan on their house in Jenks. I had bought the SUV Melissa drove her kids to school in, my grandkids, the ones I hadn't seen in 6 weeks because Melissa said their schedule was just so packed. And here she was, telling her father, fresh out of a stroke that had taken half his body from him overnight, that a cruise she'd already paid for was more urgent than sitting in a chair beside his bed. "We'll call you every day," Melissa added, like that settled something. "I promise. The second we land in port with signal, you'll hear from me." They left the room within 4 minutes of walking into it. I heard their footsteps fade down the hallway, unhurried, the sound of 2 people who had already mentally left this building an hour before their bodies caught up. The door swung shut on its own, slow and heavy, and then it was just me and the steady beep of the monitor and the ceiling tile with the water stain shaped like Texas. "I want to tell you," I cried. That would be the honest, human thing to do, and God knows I'd earned the right to. But something in me had gone cold and clear instead. The same feeling I used to get in the middle of a hostile buyout negotiation, when the sentiment drains out of a room and all that's left is the math. I had spent 5 years mistaking my daughter's silence for gratitude. I had spent 5 years calling weekly bank transfers love. Lying there with my left arm dead on the blanket, I understood with total clarity that I had been paying rent on a relationship that no longer existed, and my tenant had just told me, to my face, that a boat mattered more than my life. My right hand still worked. That was enough. I reached for the tablet on my rolling tray and opened my banking app, moving slow and deliberate through the menus with one thumb. Grant's business account was linked to mine as a guarantor, a favor I'd extended 3 years back when the consulting firm needed a credit line nobody else would offer him. I looked at the balance, then I looked at the recent activity, and a transaction from that morning caught my eye before I even had time to look for it. An $1,800 charge to a boat charter company in Galveston, time-stamped 90 minutes before they'd even walked into my hospital room. They'd booked a private sunset excursion for the first night of the cruise. Booked it, apparently, while I was still unconscious in the ICU. A man does not casually blow $1,800 chartering a boat while his father-in-law is fighting for his life 2 states away, unless he has already decided, somewhere deep down, that the fight is not his problem. I set the tablet down and I lay back against the pillow, and for the first time since the ambulance picked me up off my kitchen floor, I felt something other than fear. I felt the particular, focused calm of a man who has just found the loose thread on a fraud he's been too blind, or too hopeful, to see. I asked the nurse to bring me a phone charger and a legal pad. Then I asked her to get me the number for my attorney, a sharp, quiet woman named Denise Okafor, who had handled my estate planning for a decade and had never once told me what I wanted to hear when it wasn't true. Denise arrived at the hospital before visiting hours ended that evening, folder under her arm, reading glasses pushed up into gray hair. I told her everything. The 5 years of transfers, the co-signed loan, the SUV, the house down payment, the trust I had drafted years ago that named Melissa and her children as primary beneficiaries of nearly everything I owned, written back when she still drove out on weekends just to sit on my porch and talk, before Grant's firm and Grant's opinions and Grant's watch started showing up in every conversation like an uninvited guest. "You want to freeze the accounts tonight," Denise said. It wasn't a question. "I want to do more than freeze them," I told her. "I want to see exactly how deep this goes before I decide what's left standing when I'm done." She nodded once, the way she always did when a plan had already formed behind her eyes. "Give me until morning." I didn't sleep that night, not because of the pain, though there was plenty of it, but because my mind was doing the same thing it used to do at 2 in the morning before a big acquisition closed. Running numbers, running scenarios, refusing to rest until every variable had a place. Denise called a forensic accountant she trusted, a methodical man named Curtis Boyd who had once untangled a client's ex-husband's hidden offshore accounts in 11 days flat. By 6 in the morning, Curtis had pulled together what he could from the accounts I had legal access to, and what he found made the $1,800 boat charter look like pocket change. Grant's consulting firm did not have clients, not real ones anyway. 2 invoices from the past year, both to shell companies that traced back, after some digging, to addresses associated with Grant's own college roommate. The $4,000 a month I'd been sending wasn't seed capital. It was the entire operating budget of a business that existed mostly on a website and a stack of business cards. Melissa's name was on none of it. She either knew and said nothing, or she'd simply never asked the one question that would have unraveled everything, which, after 34 years of knowing my daughter, I suspected was closer to the truth. She had never been a schemer. She had just gotten very, very good at not looking too closely at where the money came from. That distinction mattered to me. It would matter more later. By 9 that morning, with Curtis's numbers in hand and Denise's paperwork ready, I made the calls myself, propped up in that hospital bed with my daughter's home number sitting untouched in my recent calls list. I revoked Grant as an authorized signer on the business line of credit I had guaranteed. I contacted the bank holding the mortgage on the Jenks house and formally withdrew my guarantor status, which under the terms of the original loan triggered an immediate review of the account, since Grant's income alone, once you subtracted the phantom consulting revenue, wouldn't have qualified for the loan in the first place. I called my insurance agent and removed the SUV from my umbrella policy, and I instructed Denise to draft an emergency amendment to my trust, freezing all distributions pending a full review, a legal maneuver that would take effect the moment I signed it, and hold until I said otherwise. I signed it with my right hand, my left still resting useless on the blanket, at 11:47 in the morning, 4 hours before their ship was scheduled to pull out of port. I did not call Melissa to warn her. I did not send so much as a text. I simply let the machinery I'd built over 4 decades do what machinery does, quietly, in the background, while my daughter boarded a boat believing the only urgent problem in her life was making the check-in line before it closed. The first missed call came in at 4:52 that afternoon. By 6 o'clock there were 11. By 8 there were 34. And Melissa had left 4 voicemails, each one climbing in pitch, the last one nearly incoherent, through what sounded like the beginning of tears. I did not listen to any of them right away. I let the phone buzz itself quiet on the tray table while I ate the bland hospital dinner with my one good hand and thought, for the first time in longer than I could remember, about something other than my daughter's needs. I listened to the voicemails that night, once the ward had gone dark and quiet around me. The bank had declined Grant's card at check-in for the private cabin upgrade they'd planned to surprise his parents with. Then the mortgage company had called Melissa directly, informing her the loan was under emergency review and that a decision on continued financing would come within 30 days. Then, worst of all for them, the boat charter company had called about the Sunset excursion, informing Grant that the card on file for the balance had been flagged and the reservation canceled. Melissa's last voicemail wasn't angry. It was small. It sounded like the voice she used to have as a little girl calling from a friend's slumber party, homesick and confused about why nothing felt right. "Dad, please call me back. I don't understand what's happening. Is this a mistake? Please, just call me back." I sat with that voicemail a long time before I decided what to do with it. I did not call her back that night. I let her sit with the silence the same way I had sat alone in that hospital room the day before, with nobody rushing to explain anything to her, with nothing to do but wonder. It was not cruelty. It was the first honest lesson I had ever let her learn without smoothing the path in front of her first. They cut the cruise short and flew back 2 days later, landing in Tulsa on a red-eye, exhausted and confused and, from what Denise later told me the bank had reported, unable to book a rental car because Grant's business card had been suspended and his personal one was nearly maxed from the trip. They came straight to the hospital from the airport, still in their travel clothes, and this time it was Melissa who walked in first. She looked different than she had 2 days earlier. Not dressed for a boat, just tired and scared, in the particular way a person looks when the floor they'd been standing on their whole life has quietly been removed, and they're only now realizing they were never standing on solid ground to begin with. "Dad," she said, and her voice cracked on the single syllable. "What did you do?" I was sitting up in bed by then, off the strongest of the pain medication, my mind clearer than it had been since the stroke. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and I said the thing I had been rehearsing in my head for 2 days. "I did exactly what you did to me, sweetheart. I decided something else mattered more than showing up." Grant, standing a step behind her in the doorway, tried to recover his footing the way men like him always do, with volume instead of substance. "Walter, this is insane. You froze our mortgage. Our credit is going to take a hit that could follow us for years. Do you have any idea what you've done to us?" "I have a very good idea," I told him. "Curtis Boyd ran your consulting firm's books last night. Would you like to guess how many real clients he found?" I watched something behind Grant's eyes go still and calculating. The exact same look I imagined crossed my own face in the hours after they'd left me alone in that room. Melissa turned to look at her husband, and I saw the question form on her face before she'd even decided to ask it out loud. "Grant," she said slowly, "what is he talking about?" "He's confused," Grant said too quickly. "The stroke, the medication, he's not thinking straight. I have never been more clear-headed in my life," I said. "Curtis found 2 invoices in the last 12 months, both to companies traced to your old roommate's address. That's it. That's the client roster for the business I've been funding $4,000 a month for 5 years." The room went quiet in that specific way. A room goes quiet when a lie has just run out of road. Melissa's hands were shaking. She turned fully toward her husband now, away from me entirely, and something in the set of her shoulders told me she had known, somewhere underneath the part of her mind she kept carefully unexamined, that this moment was coming. "Tell me it's not true," she said to him. "Tell me right now." Grant didn't answer. That was answer enough. "I want to tell you I felt triumphant in that moment, the way you might expect a wronged man to feel when the truth finally lands where it belongs. Mostly what I felt was tired, and a little bit sad, watching my daughter's marriage come apart in real time in a hospital room that still smelled like the antiseptic that had greeted me back into consciousness 2 days before. "I'm not doing this to punish you for existing, Melissa," I told her, once Grant had gone quiet, and the only sound in the room was her ragged breathing. "I'm doing this because 5 years ago you stopped visiting your father and started visiting your father's checkbook, and I let it happen because I was scared that if I said no to you even once, I'd lose you the way I lost your mother. But 2 days ago, lying in this bed, you told me a boat mattered more than I did, and I finally believed you." She didn't have an answer for that. I didn't expect one. They separated 4 months later, once the forensic audit Denise had commissioned made its way, at Melissa's own insistence, into a divorce filing that named Grant's business fraud specifically. It turned out the money hadn't just funded a fake consulting firm. Some of it had funded a second apartment across town, one grant kept for reasons that had nothing to do with client meetings, a discovery that came to light only because Melissa, for the first time in years, finally asked the question she'd spent half a decade avoiding. I did not restore the trust. Not all of it. Not right away. I told Melissa the truth, sitting across from her at my kitchen table 3 months into her recovery from the divorce, my left hand finally strong enough again to hold a coffee cup without shaking. "I love you," I said. I never stopped, not for one day, not even lying in that hospital bed. But I am 66 years old, and I built something with my own 2 hands that I will not watch get siphoned into somebody else's lie because I was too afraid to set a boundary. From here on, what I give you, I give freely, and what you earn yourself. That is the only kind of family I have left the strength to build. She cried at that table for a long time. Then she asked me, in a small voice that reminded me of the girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long drives, if I would teach her the business. Not hand it to her, teach her. I said yes. She started at the Sand Springs location 8 months ago, working the floor like any new hire, learning inventory and customer service, and the particular headache of a broken forklift at 7 in the morning, same as I had at her age in that first rented storefront on Cherry Street. I did not make it easy for her. I made sure of that. But I watched something happen in her over those months that I hadn't seen since she was a teenager, something that looked, unmistakably, like pride that she had actually earned. As for the rest of what I built, I redirected a portion of it somewhere else entirely. I sat down with Denise and we established the Higgins Fund, named for my late wife, dedicated to legal protection for elderly people whose adult children had done to them what mine had nearly done to me. We hired attorneys who specialize in undoing the quiet financial abuse that hides behind family love, freezing predatory trusts, unwinding fraudulent power of attorney arrangements, recovering savings that vanished into some grown child's failing business or gambling habit or second life across town. In 18 months, the fund helped recover close to $2 million for people who had nobody else in their corner. I still remember the first client we helped, a widow named Ruth out in Broken Arrow whose son had been quietly draining her retirement account for 3 years under the guise of managing her investments. When the case closed and the funds were restored, she called me personally, her voice thick with something between relief and grief, and thanked me for believing an old woman could still be worth protecting. I told her the truth. I told her I understood exactly what it felt like to lie helpless in a bed and learn, all at once, who actually shows up. Melissa still calls me every Sunday now, not because she needs anything, but because she wants to hear about my week. Last month, she brought my grandkids by the Cherry Street store, the original one, still standing, and I watched my 7-year-old grandson run his hand along the same counter I'd built with borrowed lumber back when Melissa's mother and I had nothing but a dream and a stubborn refusal to quit. He asked me if I built the whole store myself. I told him his grandmother and I built it together, and that someday, if he wanted it badly enough and was willing to earn it, it could be his too. Some evenings now, I sit out on my back porch in Tulsa, my left hand strong enough these days to hold a glass of iced tea without spilling it, and I watch the sun go down orange and slow over the plains, and I think about how close I came to spending the last years of my life funding my own quiet erasure, one wire transfer at a time, mistaking silence for love because I was too afraid to ask what love was actually supposed to cost. A stroke took the use of my left hand for a while. It gave me back something I'd lost a long time before that, which was the willingness to say no to the people I loved most, when saying no was the only thing that could save them. And me. Both. Generosity without a spine behind it isn't kindness. It's an invitation for someone to take more than you ever meant to give. If you've had to draw a hard line with your own family, one that cost you something in the moment but gave you something better in the long run, I'd like to hear about it. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and tell me what that line cost you. I read every one.